Turning to our story about British sanctions on Russia following the poisoning attack, we're joined by Britain's High Commissioner to New Zealand, Laura Clarke. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
You may have heard the interview, or at least the headlines on the interview with the Russian ambassador to New Zealand. They are saying basically that this was a provocation for the West in relations with Russia and effectively denying Russian government involvement. What is your reaction to that?
Well, we are very clear, the British government is very clear in our assessment that the Novichok nerve agent came from Russia, and our view is either that means it was a direct act by the Russian state, or the Russian government has lost control of its stock of Novichok, this military-grade nerve agent, and the Russian government, despite our invitation to come forward with an explanation, has not provided a credible explanation. And I should be clear that we have had people who have taken their very careful time over this, assessing the genesis of this matter. So we're very clear that this Novichok stems from Russia, but also it fits very much into a pattern of a Russian aggressive behaviour, the illegal annexation of Crimea, violating European airspace, hostile cyber attacks, of course the Litvinenko murder with polonium, and of course support to Assad's regime in Syria, where chemical weapons have been used. The chit list goes on, and we have been clear, and we've been clear with our partners as well, that this isn't just a violation of Chemical Weapons Convention, it's a breach of international law, and also it's a violation of the rules-based order, the values that we all work to in order that the world functions as a number of states working together.
So what are you calling on New Zealand to do?
Well, we very much welcomed the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister's statement where he called the attack repugnant, and New Zealand made a statement to the Organisation for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons, which is the chemical weapons watchdog in The Hague, where New Zealand said they shared the UK's outrage. Now, we will be working closely, we've been in close contact with all our partners. My minister in the Foreign Office in London spoke to Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters yesterday and shared our assessment, and we talked about how we need to work together to deal with this problem. And the UK has been briefing the Organisation for Prevention of Chemical Weapons, as I've said.
Okay, all right. So what about this position that the New Zealand government has about pursuing a free trade agreement with Russia? Was that discussed at your meeting?
Obviously, who New Zealand does free trade agreements with is a matter for New Zealand.
Yeah, was it discussed at the meeting?
At the meeting between ministers?
Yes.
We have a number of conversations with New Zealand across the piece. We have discussed this in the past. I would say here right now, free trade agreements are a matter for New Zealand and its people. But as I say, we very much welcome Winston Peters' very clear statement.
I know,
this was a
we've had that. Can I ask that again? Was that discussed?
It wasn't discussed in the conversation yesterday, but we have a number of conversations in our various channels between UK and New Zealand.
What is your position or thought on the desirability of New Zealand pursuing a free trade agreement with Russia at this time?
Well, our position is that we obviously have sanctions. We have EU sanctions on Russia as a result of its illegal activity in the Crimea, and we are extremely supportive. We're very supportive of an EU-New Zealand free trade agreement, and secondly, we are very keen, once we get to that point, to be pursuing a UK-New Zealand free trade agreement.
Okay,
now, I would leave it to New Zealand, I think, to reach conclusions there about compatibility and prioritisation.
Right, compatibility.
Well, in the EU, we're very clear that we have sanctions on Russia, and that that those sanctions are there for a reason, because of Russian illegal activity.
You chose the word compatibility after talking about the EU-New Zealand free trade agreement and then the UK-New Zealand free trade agreement. Are you saying that those two things are not compatible with New Zealand pursuing a free trade agreement with Russia, i.e. if we go ahead with this may affect those two other trade agreements?
I'm saying, I would go back to what I've said, that who New Zealand does free trade agreements is a matter for New Zealand. But of course, these discussions between the EU and New Zealand, discussions between the UK and New Zealand, they never have it happen in a vacuum. A whole range of different factors are always discussed. And that's probably as far as I can go now.
Have you expressed your concern about New Zealand's pursuit of a free trade agreement with Russia?
We have, as I say, a wide range of conversations. The UK and New Zealand are extremely close partners, and of course we discuss a whole range of things.
Yeah, so
some of which I'm happy to talk
Yeah.
about in public, and some of which it probably wouldn't be right, because of course the fact of diplomatic relations and international relations is you discuss a whole range of things. Some of those you want to talk about on air, and some of them you don't.
So could we take that as a yes?
You can take it as some of the things we disclose and some things we don't.
Mr. Peters, the Foreign Minister, was asked at the weekend on television whether he was still serious about pursuing a free trade agreement with Russia, and he said he was deadly serious.
Yeah, and subsequently he's put out a very clear statement condemning the use of Novichok in the UK, saying very clearly that he stands by his UK partners, and we very much welcome that statement. And as I say, we're very grateful for the news. We're very pleased that New Zealand has been very clear in its statement that, as I quote, it shares the UK's outrage, and New Zealand, of course, is a very close partner of the UK, and we are working together in many fora to talk about how we deal with this affront to what is effectively how the world works. And New Zealand, more than any other country, needs the rules-based order to work. And although that sounds like a dry term, if you're a small, outward-looking trading nation like New Zealand, you need the laws to work. You need international law to work. You need all these things to function. And what Russia's doing is undermining those laws.
Yeah. Do you put MH17 and meddling in the US election in those list of sins also?
Look, I don't want to go through a long tit-for-tat assessment of all the different charges. I would simply say that there is a very clear pattern of aggressive behaviour, and of our assessment based on expert analysis is that this attack in Salisbury on the Skripals and also on Nick Bailey, the police officer who was the first person on the scene of the crime, that attack very much fits in that pattern of hostile behaviour.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Do appreciate your time. Laura Clarke there, Britain's High Commissioner to New Zealand. 14 minutes to 8.
You're listening to Morning Report, nearly 2 weeks after RNZ News revealed